looks so much better in the photos without name tags. Okay, good morning. Let's get started. Welcome to VICA's 31st Annual Business Forecast Conference. I need to get the right script. Okay, my name is Charles Crumpley, and I'm the publisher of the San Fernando Valley Business Journal, and I'm also chair of VICA's Labor and Employment Committee, and I'm your moderator for this panel. So first of all, let's thank our track sponsor for both the data security and for the elections panels, and that's the Los Angeles Police Protective League. And let's also acknowledge our panel sponsor, NINJIO. Thank you. Appreciate that. And as you know, at your seat, there's an exit survey for this panel, and I encourage you to fill it out at the end of the panel session. And please return it to VICA staff, or you can leave it at the registration booth in the foyer. You know, the other day I heard on the radio that the way you pronounce the word foyer or foyer determines whether you're Republican or Democrat. So in trying to be neutral, I'll say you can leave it in the foyer or you can leave it in the foyer, whichever you like. But VICA does need your feedback in order to prepare for next year's event. So please take the 1 minute or the 2 minutes to fill it out and turn it in. Now the biographies of our panelists are already in your journal. So I just want to make very brief introductions so that we have more time for discussion and for your questions. So let's start with Adam Grant. He's a partner with Alpert, Barr, and Grant. And Stephen Reese. He's the state and local government technology strategist with Microsoft. We have Zac Schuler, who's the founder and CEO of NINJIO. And we have James Thiering of Mission Community Hospital. So let's get started. The worst threats, of course, are the ones that you don't see coming, and from hospitals to banks to government infrastructure that we all rely on, strong data security is critical to every business. Now, this panel will shed some light on the threats that we don't understand, the data breaches that sound like they're named after a dystopian video game, and why data security is something that no business can turn a blind eye to. So I'm going to give each of the panelists a minute or two to kind of make an opening statement and to get things started, and then we're going to ask some questions of each of our panelists and then open it up for questions from you. So let's start with Jim.
All right, good morning everybody and welcome. I'm Jim Thiering and I'm the CEO at Mission Community Hospital, and you know, in this industry, in the hospital industry, we're mandated by the government to have electronic health records, and so it's a huge focus. When I was asked to be on this panel, one of the questions was, well, hey, being that you're mandated to have electronic health records, you must have all kinds of requirements from the government, from the regulatory bodies that you have to cover, and the reality is there are very few, so we learned the hard way. And Missions learned the hard way. We've had some fortunate, some unfortunate events that we've had to work through. And it's really opened our eyes. As kind of the non-technical guy here on the panel, I've learned more than I needed to know, more than I thought I would want to know in this role about IT. And I think that's the best lesson for that is you can't take the IT for granted or underestimate the need. And what I'll say is that it's good to spend a few more dollars up front than what you might have to do in the back end should an event occur. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that as the panel goes on. So thank you.
Jim, I think we will get into a little bit more of that. Thank you. So let's go to Zac.
Hi, my name is Zac Schuler. I'm the founder and CEO of NINJIO. I wasn't really aware that we sponsored this, but that's pretty cool. Thanks to Jamie. So we make 3 to 4 minute long animated videos that teach your employees how not to get hacked. We release one every 30 days based on the latest breach that's made headline news to create a high level of relevance and a high level of engagement so that people actually watch. We replace the 45-minute long death by PowerPoint that many of you have to go through where you click as fast as you can to get to the end of it And at the end of the day, you're not really learning anything, and anything that you might learn 2 weeks later, you haven't retained it. And considering that 93% of security breaches are due to human error, and with all the great blinking lights that we all have in our data center trying to filter that out, which many of them do a really good job, at the end of the day, it only takes one. And it's that human behavior, the human identity that we are trying to change through our process. And happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for your track sponsorship, too.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Stephen Ross. Stephen Reese, pardon me.
That's okay. So I'm going to pick up on what Zac said just a moment ago, because I think it's super important. We can put all the security controls in the world around technology, we can write policies, and what typically ends up happening is one of two things. It's either ignorance, not knowing what they shouldn't be doing, or it's the fact that they're just trusting on someone's good instincts. I did a security assessment years and years and years ago, and we found that we could enter a secured area if we just showed up at the door with our hands full, because people were very friendly and they wanted to open the door. And the mitigation was actually a sign on the door that said no tailgating. And so you probably are thinking, wow, as a Microsoft guy talking about these types of things, is the core of security is really about likelihood and impact. We talked about this on the pre-call for this. The impact of a security breach is the impact of a security breach. If my wallet is compromised, whether it's compromised because I left it in the parking lot or it was locked in a safe that was bypassed, the net result is the same, right? But we have to put controls in place to help create tripwires, identify that there's challenges, but to Zac's point, we have to also train the users that they have a role in this too. And without that piece, the best laid security plans, security strategies, and tools that you put in place will fail at the hands of a user that's either ignorant or just trying to be helpful. So hopefully we can dive into those discussions today as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And let's go to Adam Grant.
Good morning. My practice includes data privacy and data breach. Data breaches are scary. The laws surrounding them are overwhelmingly daunting and changing by the moment. Many of you may know that California is about to bring into play one of the most sweeping data privacy laws as of January 1. When clients come to me, they tell me, I am scared, I'm overwhelmed, how do I deal with all of these laws? I don't know what to do first. I then tell them, by analogy, let me explain to you how I approach this. If you look at my bio, you're going to see one side of my card. What you don't see on the other side of my card is when I'm not doing these types of things, I train for ultra-endurance triathlons. So in November, I'm actually doing the Ultraman World Championship, which I qualified for this past year. That's a 3-day triathlon where the first day is a 6.2-mile ocean swim and a 90-mile bike. Then I sleep for a few hours and get to ride my bike 171 miles over about 8,000 feet of elevation gain. Day 3 is a cruise day of only a double marathon, 52.4 miles. So I tell my clients, this is what I do for fun. And they smile, and I say, and this is how I'm going to help you approach the data privacy laws. Because if I look at 6.2 miles of swimming in open water as 6.2 miles, that will be daunting and overwhelming. A total amount of running, you imagine the amount of calories I burn. I said, if I try and fathom that all at once, it is difficult to imagine. So let's sit down, take your business, take it moment by moment, and take it law by law, and I'll explain it to you one bit at a time. And much like I complete a 3-day triathlon, we're going to get you through this. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Appreciate it. Tell you what, let's get started. Let's go back to Jim Thiering, and he has a really sobering story, and I want to thank you in advance for sharing it. So why don't you tell us about what happened at Mission Community Hospital?
Well, you know, in March of this year, we did have a ransomware attack, and it shut our system down in about an hour and a half. We noticed early on in the morning that there was some issues with radiology. And you know, as you can imagine, the nightmare that went on in a hospital. The nice thing is that we do have the ability to go to downtime procedures. We do that frequently, and so you know, you take out paper and pencils and you write orders. You know, the nurses can implement orders that the doctors write. We're lucky at that. There are some ancillary issues. It took our whole system down, but we were able to we had a good backup, which I think is something that is critical. Critical for us is that I think we lost a half hour of data. That was it, which we eventually got back when the codes were cracked. The virus that we had was called Gantt Crab 2.0. I shouldn't have to know that. And what's worse, when we had the security experts come in afterwards, kind of the forensic guys, they said, yeah, you can go on the dark web and pick that up and deploy it yourself. So these aren't necessarily sophisticated hackers that are going after hospitals, or going after our companies here, the folks in the room. They're just sending this stuff out, hoping that an employee will click on something. And that's the biggest thing we took away from this whole issue is we found computer zero. They got lucky, found computer zero, and basically someone clicked on an email attachment that embedded a file that sat dormant, and for whatever reason then picked up and went off and encrypted everything. We were fortunate not to have a data breach. Nothing left the facility, which was good. Glad I didn't have to call Adam and sit across that table and talk about HIPAA violations and protected health information. But it could have been a lot worse. It still was $1 million for a small hospital to get out of that. That's not the ransom. We went down the road. We chose not to pay the ransom for various reasons, and we had a good backup. But most of the money is spent on refortifying our system, training the employees. It seems like for the hospital, we spend a lot of time putting our deflector shields at the front. You know, we are hardwiring, taking care of the hardware, we're fortifying the hardware and the software. But then when someone who's on the ship is there to let someone else in, all that is thwarted. So education of the employees, and that's from our perspective what we see the biggest threat is. Now our effort is education, and lots of videos. You know, Zack and I are going to have to talk afterwards, and you know, institute some of these that everyone has to go through in our hospital.
Thank you, Jim. You made reference to sitting across from Adam. So why don't we go to Adam? What are some of the legal and operational risks that businesses face if something like this happens, if they don't get data security right?
Thank you. So I wanted to touch on 2 points that Jim had just mentioned. One, who knows what the dark web is?
Now
okay.
I do.
That's pretty surprising. That's great.
I think the question is, who knows how to get there?
Right.
Our kids.
Yes. And then I'll give you an example by anecdote on operational challenges. So there was a equally offensive ransomware issue that happened because of attorney-client privilege. I can't give you the exact connection my firm had to it, but the unfortunate recipient of it was Larson Studios. You may not know Larson Studios, but probably most people know Orange is the New Black. That's a Netflix series. So essentially, Larson Studios was a post-production facility that was handling for Netflix all of the new series that was coming out for Orange is the New Black. They suffered a data breach and a ransomware attack. Here's the challenge. As reported, so I'm not disclosing anything, as reported, the attack was not disclosed to the clients. Larson Studios, according to the articles, had basically said, you know what, we're going to handle it in-house and deal with it. So the operational challenges became the ramifications of that. Part of what Sony suffered a number of years ago was something similar. If you don't report it quickly enough, you have problems with the customers, you have problems with your consumers. Making sure, this seems to be a bit of an antithesis of what you want to do, because from a business standpoint, admitting that you had a data breach is, in one sense, straight up, the feeling is, you know, wait a second, we're not good enough, we made a mistake. Well, guess what? No, not at all. It's getting ahead of the game from a PR standpoint, it's getting out with your clients. Legally, you are required, as soon as reasonably necessary, as soon as practical, to get the notice out. There are a few exceptions, such as if there's an ongoing police investigation along those lines. But otherwise, get out in front of it and say immediately that this has happened. Because if you don't, unfortunately, like Larson Studios, who, by the way, just recently filed Chapter 7, you have ramifications you don't particularly like.
Okay, thank you. That sounds ominous. So why don't we go to Zack? Why don't you talk us through some of the worst attacks that have hit businesses, or you know, how do some of the worst attacks happen, and what are some of the steps that a business should take to prevent it?
Great question. So according to the FBI, there's a term called business email compromise, or email account takeover. And that's where the hacker actually gets your username and your password for your email account. And they will sit there for months. They will learn your dialect. They will learn about who you talk to, what you say to these people. They'll learn about your family. They'll learn everything they can while they're just sitting quietly reading every email that comes in and out of your inbox. I had still have a good friend of ours, of the family. They were a small furniture company. They provided furniture to hotels, operated on very small margins. Their controller was BEC'd, and I don't remember the exact series of events, but the small furniture company wired $285,000 to China, but to the wrong account. The net effect of that was they had to pull their 2 kids out of private school, which is how we knew the family. They sold their house in Thousand Oaks, and they picked up and they moved to North Carolina, where living expenses are less expensive and labor is less expensive, and they continue to run their furniture company from there. But it's amazing the attacks right now that are going on in small business. And people say, well, why? Well, the reality is that the Microsofts of the world, the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, they have really, really good security defenses in place. Small and medium-sized businesses, especially small ones, they simply don't. And so they're a very, very easy vector. They're a very easy, company to attack. And business email compromise is one of the worst things. Now, how do you protect yourself from that? Every time you have the ability with any account, email account, even your Instagram account, turn on two-factor authentication, right? You log in, and then the best type of two-factor authentication is where you download an app on your phone, such as Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator. And then after you log in, it sends you a little thing on your phone to approve the login, and you say, okay. That is the #1 best way, as of right now, to stop business email compromise attacks. The FBI, I don't remember the report that they released, but business email compromise is 15 times more expensive than the next most expensive attack. So that's something to be on the lookout for.
Something to continue. So just so you understand what that really means in terms of a business email compromise, it sounds a lot more complicated than it really is. What happens is once they've established a username and password, they create a forwarding rule on your email box that forwards all of your inbound messages to an external mailbox, and then they create a delete rule to delete all the forwarded messages out of your sent items so that you don't see them. That's it. They don't have to be logging into the system constantly. They're getting that proactively. So what Zac is saying is, once I've got one account, I can now send emails as that person to other people. So now I start to compromise other accounts. And then I figure out where the keys are, and that's where I can go live. It's a marathon to these folks now. They don't need to sprint. It's not about how much they can get, how fast. It's about how low can they lay until they find the keys and then open the door themselves.
So along those lines, in dealing with emails and forwarding emails and how that comes literally into play, about a month ago, I was, and this happens frequently, I tell clients, you can call me on the weekends. There's chances are I'm going to be working out at some point, but well, it's okay, I'll get back to you shortly thereafter. So on a weekend, I get a call from a referral source, a business attorney, and she said, I have an immediate issue. I said, let me pull my bike over and let me talk to you about this. And she then proceeded to tell me she's in the process of settling about a $3 million case. So the emails are flying back and forth between counsel, and then all of a sudden emails are also flying back and forth between the respective parties. As between the respective parties, they're emailing wiring instructions. This is the settlement process via email occurred over about a 3.5-week time period. At some point early on in this 3.5-week time period, somebody hacked into the system, and they were monitoring emails, and they were monitoring emails going back and forth. So when the time came on where to send the money, the $750,000 final payment, that's when they spoofed in. And the issue became, whose fault was it and who owes the money at that point? So that's why I got brought in, because they needed somebody who dealt with a data breach, had the connections with a forensic IT person to be able to deal with. And then this business litigator, while she is exceptional, she said, I have no clue how this data breach or any of this language is talking about. I said, I do, so let's meet and let's deal with this. So I, Saturday evening, sat down with all the clients, brought in a forensic IT person, figured out what was going on, and we had to deal with a motion with a due date on Tuesday. So it meant getting everything together. It meant getting a declaration from the IT forensic person. It meant scrambling to get a declaration from a banking expert who could talk about standard operating procedures for wiring instructions. We won the motion, and they ended up having to pay an additional $750,000 because they wired it to someplace in China. That's practically how it happens on a regular basis. And to coin the phrase from what Zac was saying, why small and medium-sized businesses? Low-hanging fruit. You're easy. You're easy. And unfortunately, by definition, a small and medium-sized business doesn't have the finances, doesn't have the resources to really dedicate to make their system as secure as possible. Hackers know it. Unfortunate.
So that's great. We have that's a great point. We have a lot of small and medium-sized businesses in the Valley area. What do they do? This is a question for all of you. What's the best thing? Yeah.
So the first thing is, do not call the police. Do not call the sheriff if you have a financial hack. We've been talking about business email compromise. 99% of those are wire transfer type issues. The FBI has jurisdiction over those, so your very first call should be to the FBI. And if you're lucky and you get a hold of an agent that has experience in BEC, there's a 20 to 30% chance if you get a hold of them within 24 hours and they hop on the case that you can get a wire recall done.
What is BDC?
BEC is business email compromise. That's the technical term where the hacker actually takes over the account or spoofs the account. And so if that happens to anybody out here where there's a financial transaction involved, and probably not $5,000 or $10,000, but something of material significance, the FBI should be your first phone call.
Stephen.
So just a quick show of hands. How many of you are super excited to open your email after this session right now? Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. So to address that question, I think the legacy thinking has been low-hanging fruit is the smaller business because they can't afford these large infrastructures. To the rescue, so to speak, is cloud scale, right? Hyperscale cloud services. To Zach's point earlier, companies like Microsoft, I believe, is the second most attacked organization in the world, next to the federal government. We sustain denial of service attacks, which is much of a technical term, upwards of 600 gigabits at a time. We invest $1 billion plus a year in cybersecurity, both on the defensive side as well as the litigation side. So we have two farms inside of our organization. One's called the Cyber Defense Operations Center, and the other is called the Digital Crimes Unit. And the Digital Crimes Unit focuses on after the fact, right? Or how do we stop the Chinese hackers from coming in? How do we block the ransomware from reaching its destination? There's that piece of it. But the advent of cloud has given us the ability to allow companies to use the same services we protect Microsoft with at a cost that's effective for the way you're going to consume that. And I bring that up because it's not all doom and gloom, right? We've talked about the people aspect, and that's super important. The best laid plans will get, Mike Tyson, right? Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? If somebody does something wrong, the best we can hope for is that we have tripwires in place to throw an alert out, and that we're able to garner that alert. Now, I'll tell you that some of the largest ransomware attacks that you know the names of that have happened in the past 18 months, had they been watching their alerts, would have known a week in advance that it was coming. But they have so much noise and so much signaling coming from so many different devices, and realistically speaking, they don't invest in a cybersecurity team to sit there 24/7 and monitor the environment. That stuff happens. It was said earlier, right? We have to be right 100% of the time. They only have to be right once, and they're in. So the good news is, whoever that may be, there are solutions out there to help you defend yourself, to mitigate as much of that risk or drop that likelihood that you are going to be the target of a compromise or that you're not going to be able to detect it ahead of time. And that's what I would implore the organizations to start looking at, is what services can you subscribe to that will help your people help you defend yourself.
And I hate to bring it up, but are they cost effective? I mean, anybody can spend $1 million to get really good, presumably to get really good defense. But are there products out there that are in fact cost effective?
It's all metered on how many users and how many signals and things like that, right? So to your point, right? No one ever spends $1 million to solve a $100,000 problem. We just don't. You'll spend $100,000 to solve $1 million problem, right? And hyperscale cloud really is what empowers us to do those types of things with organizations of every size. Is you consume it based, again, on your risk. If your business value is $10 million, would you spend $50 million annually to protect it? No. It's going to be cost effective based on the measurements of your risk that you need to apply for. If you do need to spend $50 million to protect your $10 million business, you need to reevaluate what you're protecting and why you're not charging more for your asset, right? That's a different business problem.
So from being cost effective and what can a small to medium-sized business do, we've talked about kind of where the rubber hits the road, and that's with the individual person. There's a concept called social engineering. In other words, what it means in this context is essentially getting into your system through literally people looking at your social media, finding out information about you, finding your email addresses, finding out where you go, finding out who may be your spouse, and literally calling up companies. You'd be surprised how helpful customer service representatives can be when you start giving certain information, which is why the dual authentication is really important. Don't just say, okay, somebody's email address or where they live from, where they were born, or their date of birth. Most of us have that on our social media. Think about that. The other thing that is cost effective, and Steve was talking about a tripwire and what you do. What has not been mentioned yet is making sure that, because it's going to happen eventually, you have cyber liability insurance. That's many businesses will have CGL policies, common general liability policies. Frequently, they don't have, as part of their general offering, a cyber liability component to it. Frequently, it's a rider onto it. There are some carriers that require you to have a completely separate policy. It is cost effective, and it's insurance. Clients look at me all the time and say, I want you to write a contract that nobody's ever going to breach. Sorry, that is not possible, because somebody's going to say, I know I'm breaching it, I don't care, sue me. So the same thing applies. Eventually you're going to get hit, very likely. You just need to have something in place, which is what I tell my clients on contracts. I'll write it in a way that gives you a defense. With the data breach, be prepared, you have a defense, have insurance available for it.
If I could just add to that real quick, only 30% of organizations right now have cyber liability insurance, and there are organizations that provide all different types of insurance, including cyber. No two cyber policies are the same, and so one of the things that you want to watch out for is I've heard stories about where the network was not actually breached, but the people were socially engineered to give up information. And since there wasn't an actual network breach, the cyber liability insurance didn't kick in. And so when you're looking at these policies, you really want to make sure that you're covered for things like social engineering, where there isn't a network breach, but there is a financial loss. And any client that I ever talk to, cyber liability insurance is like one of the most important things you can do, along with identity protection. Good corporate identity protection is also really important because, hackers are getting at people's identities, and if you can get ahead of that, that's important as well.
Okay, terrific. Let's turn it over now to the audience, and let's see if we have any audience questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I got a question. I came in a little late, so if you covered this, my apologies, but what's your advice on passwords? How to create them, how to store them? I have so many passwords, I can never keep track of them.
Yeah, I could probably take a swag at that.
Yeah, thank you. So my solution of writing them all down and having them on a sticky note on my computer, probably that's good. Yeah.
Where's your desk?
That's actually probably a bit safer than other people who put them in Word documents and store them on their computers. So there's been a trend, and the trend is to move from passwords to passphrases. So for example, a complex password, which Microsoft would consider 8 characters long, combination of letters and numbers and a special character. On a pretty powerful computer, without that word being a dictionary word, it can get cracked in 9 hours. If you add 3 characters to that 8-digit password and you make it 11, it takes 400 million years to crack it. So, length matters. What's a good way to create length with memory? If you are on Amazon, your password could literally be all lowercase, I love to buy things. And if Amazon is up with kind of current NIST standards and how NIST views passphrases instead of passwords, then they will allow that password. And that password is pretty much, as long as they've encrypted it, is pretty much uncrackable from a brute force type of attack. And so the way you memorize it is you have a word that you associate with the website that you go to. You create a passphrase around that, and that's one good way. The other thing that I'll mention, and I think the pros outweigh the cons with this, is software like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane, etc. Password managers, I swear by them. And I think they're a really good thing to have. And then my last piece of advice would be never, ever, 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 ever use the same password on multiple websites. Because if they crack one, they've cracked them all. And they can literally crack one password, stick it in a piece of software that will try to auto-log into 10 million different websites, and then they end up getting into multiple accounts of yours.
As an industry, we're moving away from passwords. We're trying to at a breakneck pace. To what Zac mentioned earlier, take what he just described, and even if you went back to the 8-character password with one uppercase, one lowercase, and one special character, and you add a multi-factor element to that, where in addition to knowing the password, you have to respond to a question on your phone or type in a code that shows up in it. You change the whole dynamic of password management at that point. I subscribe to everything Zac said. I use LastPass. I don't use the same password for any 2 sites. I don't even use memorable passwords. Everything is just auto-generated and stored, and I keep it, locked up behind a hardware key behind that. So there's no, I won't say there's no getting into it, but again, the likelihood of somebody getting in versus the impact of it, to me, it's not very high. But part of it is learning how to use those tools too, right? Oftentimes people get password managers and they don't learn how to use them, and so they end up putting the same password in the password manager for 100 different sites as well. So everything he said I agree with, but the goal would be add something else to the fact that it's a password, because at the end of the day it's still a password. And what Zac mentioned about it taking 400 million years when you add 3 characters, then theoretically that's accurate. But if I add more compute power and more compute power and more compute power, and just like there's a dark web for these applications, there's a dark web to rent compute power. And people can run password hashes against these things in minutes. That typically would take 9 hours or 10 hours to do. They can do it in minutes now. So, when you figure out a foolproof way, let me know and give me 15 minutes. I'll find a smarter fool. What we have to do is we just have to figure out what that balance is. And honestly, the balance is don't rely solely on a password, period. End of discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of like an ATM card, right? You've got something physical that you have in your hand, and you have your PIN. So that's why it's hard for somebody to break, you use your ATM card, right? Because it's something that you have and something that you know. The password is what you know. Your phone is what you have. So multi-factor authentication using your phone that's in your possession is always going to be the best solution, at least as of 2019.
And for small and medium-sized businesses, I would subscribe to everything that was just said, but even on a more basic level, kind of on the KISS principle. Change your passwords on a regular basis. If somebody's going to crack them, fine, change them. Have, as part of your company's policy, every 30 days, change them. That will make it more difficult, and it's simple.
And that was one of the things we did at Mission was two-factor authentication. We did that throughout for all the employees to access their email, especially if it's remote. If it's inside, we don't. But if you're accessing remote, there's a separate two-factor authentication for getting on remote access to our network. So we've actually implemented 2 separate two-factor authentications. So that was, unfortunately.
That was post-breach.
Yes, post-breach, right. And, that does weigh, the problem in California, it does have a wage and hour issue. If you have hourly employees who, don't want to use, if you don't give them cell phones, now they have to use their cell phones. So You got to put an app on their cell phone, and if they're using it, then now they're using it for business. And so, we've got some HR issues that we have to deal with. It's very complicated in California.
Yeah. Great. Another question? Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, for us, having a good backup really helped us not have to click on that. We didn't even click on the link, so we have no idea what the amount was. And then when we got some of the security professionals in, one of the things they said is, you have a weak network, and what a lot of times they'll do, as soon as they know they have a breach, they'll try to get back in and go right back in and re-breach. And then now you've got a second, and then these are all separate. I'm learning, I've learned all this stuff. These are separate, so now you've got 2 different ransoms you got to pay. And so if we're not prepared to stop that, that went into it. But for us, I mean, I can't stress it enough. Having a good backup of your data is critical, and that helps. If we didn't have a good backup, we would have no choice but to pay the ransom to get the data back. And I think this version was cracked. I think a couple months after our breach and after our ransomware attack, and so because those go out and those are actually those are distributed as you get the codes. Those get put out. They're put out for free, and so it would have taken 2 months, 60 days we would have to weather before we could know if we were going to get our data back. So that was the number 1 consideration, and the weaknesses that were in our system was number 2.
I think just real quick to add to that, a good backup is absolutely critical, but a good backup also has to be segregated enough from the network so that when a ransomware attack happens, it doesn't also attack your backup. Right. And then the third point to that would be, don't only have a backup, but have a full strategy on how to recover from that backup. Who's the person that has to do the recovery, right? What's the process to do the recovery? In what order do you do the recovery? What servers do you recover first, second, third, et cetera? And that's called a business continuity plan, right? And if you have that, then don't pay the ransom.
Are there times when a business should pay the ransom? What are the circumstances when that should happen?
I think the first thing you have to think about is you're dealing with a crook. So paying the ransom doesn't necessarily warrant you're going to get anywhere closer to where you were before you paid the ransom at that point, right? I mean, these are not upstanding citizens that are trying to validate your security for you, and you're paying them a fee to show you that in fact you had a vulnerability. That's not who you're dealing with. And so I kind of go back to like the customers I've worked with, and again, I work in state and local government, so you can probably fill in the blanks of breaches that I'm aware of or have been involved with. We have not seen a case where someone has paid the ransom, and some of them have suffered through months and months of recovery because of that, but you pay the ransom and then you still suffer through months and months of recovery. I'll take the bet that I'm just going to suffer through months and months and not spend millions of dollars to find out for sure. That's the strategy we tend to see. Some of them are just, hey, you know what? Cut bait on that data for now, hand everybody a brand new computer when they walk in the door tomorrow, and we'll figure out how to get that data back, but at least you've got to go forward with your 911 systems, whatever the case may be, and we'll figure out how to recover the data behind the scenes, right? And this kind of goes to a different problem that I've always shared with my customers. I come from the professional services background, and professional services for anybody is a negotiation, right? I always laugh. It's the comment from the movie Armageddon. You're on a ship getting ready to travel 22 Gs off the ground with 71,000 moving parts built by the lowest bidder, right? Kind of doesn't make you feel good. But when we negotiate professional services, we negotiate like that. We want to drive that price down as far as we do. It seems that no one has the budget to do it right the first time, but everybody finds the budget to fix it when it didn't go right. And that's a whole different problem to deal with, but most of my customers just move away from it and then figure out how to recover once they're able to bring their operations back online.
Okay, great. Sumantra.
Well, blockchain's a ledger, right? It's the implications from a cybersecurity perspective will be interesting because a lot of it really depends on the use case. Blockchain has its use cases today, but there's a requirement that you have to trust every ledger in order to make it transitory, right? And that's not the case today. So I think there's applications specifically around data validation, but we're not seeing it in terms of protection. We're seeing it in terms of validation of theft or identification of theft of information, not protection. It's an after the fact right now, at least what I'm seeing.
Lisa.
I wanted to get some more insights on the PR side of things. I mean, you talked about being able to sort of admit it when it happens. And recently there was a big data breach, and a lot of people were asked to, I think it was with one of the credit agencies, people were asked to sign up. And I think because so many people signed up, the secondary outreach back into customers was, you're eligible to receive mitigation funds if you can prove that your data was breached. And to me, I'm just curious from like what are some of the best practices, because I don't know if my data was breached or not, and it could happen 5 months from now. What are some of the best practices that companies can use when their data is breached, starting from the letting consumers know, but also sort of how you handle consumer concerns as we move forward?
So from a legal standpoint, separate and apart from the PR issue, from a legal standpoint, depending upon how you communicate with your customers, and I don't want to get into legalese and into the weeds of that, so I'm going to kind of do a broad brush, but depending upon how you communicate with your clients, dictate, and how many clients you have, dictates how you are actually going to advise them of the data breach. It's always best to err on the side of caution. So if you basically think that their personal identifiable information has been compromised, you advise them in whatever form in non-legalese, in real simple ways. And I craft these letters or emails or posts in very straightforward ways, telling them this is generally what happened. And as a matter of California law, there's a formula that you essentially have to follow. When did it happen? What happened? What did you do? How can they protect themselves? And frequently you then offer, as part of the how they can protect themselves, some kind of identity protection for a certain amount of time. And that goes out. Some people take it prophylactically, meaning they immediately sign up. Statistically, kind of like when you send out a survey, most don't. That just is. And then making sure, shifting a little bit to a PR standpoint, depending upon how large the breach is, have a point person. There are PR crisis management people, some who specialize in data breaches as well. And make sure that they are contacted, work with them. From a standpoint of potential litigation, there's a number of cases out there that provide roadmaps on how PR people can work directly with the law firm to maintain attorney-client privilege. I actually co-authored an article on that about a year ago, because if you're looking down the road at litigation, You want to have some of the communications with your PR person, kind of how you want to message things, not necessarily out there in raw form. So keeping it covered by attorney-client privilege is important.
Good. Anyone else on that point? Chandra.
Charlie, can I take this one?
Wait,
Yeah.
that's
I'm
akin
going to
to-
answer right behind you, so go ahead.
That's akin to a client telling me, I want you to draft a contract that nobody's going to break.
Yeah, so we have a kind of neuroscience-based methodology around training. And
What does that mean, neuroscience-based?
Well, it's proven by scientists that the way that we approach training actually works. There's a term we use called frequency cures curiosity. The number one reason why people click on links or go to websites or open up attachments they shouldn't is because they're curious. How do you cure curiosity? Well, I like to tell a story. If you were on your way to this conference this morning and you had a text message and you were waiting for it and you pulled it out of your pocket and all of a sudden you got pulled over and you know you're getting an $800 ticket for texting and driving. When you leave the conference and your phone is in your pocket and you get a text message, you're probably not going to pull it out of your pocket. Why? Because of the recency of what just happened. And so the key to good security awareness training is not once a quarter, it's not once a year, it is literally once a week. And now you say, well, how do you do that? Through our methodology, and you can use your own, I would just say follow the same methodology, is that we release an episode once a month. It's 3 to 4 minutes long. It's micro-learning. In the second week, we release an infographic that can get consumed in 17 seconds. In the third week, we release a little anchoring cartoon that can get consumed in 10 seconds. And then we have a movie poster for the next episode that's coming out that gets consumed in 3 seconds. And then we have posters that get hung up around the break room that can get consumed in 3 seconds. And what are you doing? You are creating a security-aware culture within the organization, and then you start to create a digital secure identity. We all have today a security identity that's built within us. What do I mean by that? What do we do when we leave our house? What do we do when we walk out of our car? Lock the car. If we're the last one to leave the office, what do we do? Arm the alarm and lock, right? So we already have this physical security identity as part of who we are. And so the key is for the organization is to create a digital security identity within people. And the way that you do that is through frequency and drip marketing to your users so that security awareness is always front of mind and they're always critical on every email that crosses their inbox.
I'll also add to that, I work for a bank, so obviously wire fraud, suspicious emails, is always a concern, but even having a large, being a part of a large organization, we actually get phish test emails.
Mhm.
So we'll get internally. So anybody on my team that opens up this suspicious email, stuff on the link, I get notified and they got to review their training, be reminded that
That's right.
And then the other part of it is experimental training, meaning doing stuff in the field where they're actually quite accountable for being curious, right? So they wouldn't forget, just like getting pulled over. So I think that's a great example.
Well, and there's basic hygiene, right? So when you click on that link in the email, when somebody clicks on that link, something's happening. One of two things typically. I won't say this is purely, but typically, and I would say it's a high 90s%, one of two things is happening. They're either going to get prompted for credentials, or the file's going to try and write something to the local machine to exploit a vulnerability, okay? So how do you protect, by the way, I have this battle constantly with my customers. They don't want to patch their systems.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to, right? It's going to break software.
That's a great point. You have to update. Yeah.
You do, right? So basic hygiene is you don't wait to brush your teeth until they're falling out of your head. You brush your teeth every day to prevent them from falling out of your head. You patch your systems to prevent, right? Most file writing breaches, where it's writing and then using lateral movements, things like that, most of those have already been prevented, believe it or not. Because there's a bounty for those things, and so most people disclose it to the Microsofts of the world or the Semantics or whomever it's compromising their code to. They disclose it well ahead of time because the reality of it is cybersecurity is all about monetization now. So if the guy who finds the bug can legally go get $250,000 or 25 grand or 50 grand for disclosing it, that's easy money. He's not got a risk of getting arrested there, right? So there's that hygiene. There's the hygiene we talked about earlier, which is using multi-factor authentication, where when the user clicks on the link, even if they type in their credentials, there's still a function that has to happen. Now, that's still not 100%. And that's where I think the combination of the repeated training and the reinforcement and the testing of your tools to make sure your people aren't clicking on those links, and the ones that are getting additional levels of training. It's all of those things, right? It's not, there's no magic bullet. And all of that put together is just going to decrease the likelihood of it happening. It doesn't mean it won't still happen, but you're stacking the deck closer into your favor.
And I also don't want to use the word training too loosely, right? There is training where there might be a little animated character that's saying, do this, don't do that, click here, don't click there, right? People tune out of that very quickly. And this isn't a sales pitch for us because anybody else can do this, but when you make the training story-based, and in our methodology, we emotionally connect to the user in the first scene of the episode so that people actually pay attention, and then they go through the teachable moment where we focus just on one attack vector. That's the type of training that you need that engages the audience. Gamify it. Make it so that whoever completes the training the fastest and gets the best score on the quiz gets the most points. Do that over the next 6 months. The top 3 winners get an Amazon Echo, whatever it is, right? Gamification and training works great. Use carrots, not sticks. But be very wary on the different types of training that are out there, the stuff that's going to put people to sleep and the stuff that's going to keep people engaged.
Great. Yes.
Yeah, my suggestion, there are companies that are called MSPs out there, and the MSPs service small and medium-sized businesses with their IT support. There's a new brand of MSP called MSSP, Managed Security Services. My advice would be to hire an MSSP. They come in, they deploy the tools. In many cases, they deploy the training. They do everything, and they'll focus on post-breach, how do you keep yourself secure. They'll focus on implementing tools by Microsoft, where they're very low cost because they're all done on a per user basis, right? And then they'll focus on, if you do have a breach, how do we localize that breach to just that one machine, as opposed to reaching out to the rest of the network? And there are things that you can do in network topology that very simply will fix that or will prevent that. So I would look at hiring an expert, an MSSP.
That's a great question, Jack. Any other thoughts on that, along that line?
Along those lines, because our firm did exactly that to come in, and they do a risk assessment on your entire system. And then, you know, when the question came up, you know, how expensive, it's just too much. They give you, quite frankly, a menu. And then, like with anything, like with any, like insurance, what's your deductible, what's your coverage? You pick and choose. And it's up to you on, you know, what is your risk tolerance? Do you want to go with, you know, the Rolls-Royce with platinum rims? Do you need that? Or is, you know, a Chevrolet Impala with some really slick, you know, tires on it pretty cool for where you're going? That's your balance. What's your price point?
Any more questions? Anyone else? Yes.
I got to ask you this question since you guys are data and security specialists about what you think of Bitcoin, about its security and the whole notion of paying ransom in Bitcoin.
So I'm going to hit it from the legal standpoint, okay? It's actually a point that I wanted to bring up earlier when we were talking about cyber liability insurance. Look at your policies, because the definition of what ransomware is, listen, it's all in the details. Look at your policy if you have one and see if actually Bitcoin is going to be included. I've read many policies where if you look at the definition of ransomware, Bitcoin is not included, and yet what is most often requested? Bitcoin.
99% of the time.
Right, so you may have a policy for this that doesn't cover what 99% of what they're asking for. Key issue.
Yeah, so the reason that is because Bitcoin will be worth $30,000 tomorrow and $8 on Monday, right? And the volatility and the value of Bitcoin is almost unquantifiable. What my suggestion has been, because I look at these policies with some of my customers, is you draw an equation of the value of the Bitcoin or the cryptographic currency drawn back to the value of the US dollar, right? So if my policy covers $1 million, I will cover up to $1 million translated into Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever's being requested. He's right. That's why Bitcoin gets excluded, is because of the volatility of that cryptocurrency market. It can't. I mean, imagine an insurance company that quantifies Bitcoin as their payment method, and an attack happens tomorrow and Bitcoin's worth $50,000 per Bitcoin, not $6. You could break a company.
I would just ask the hacker, hey, can you take my credit card number?
Yeah.
And PIN number,
check.
right?
Yeah, there you go. One more quick question. If we had met, I don't know, 10 years ago, we probably would have been talking about the Nigerian scam. You know, you give them the bank card number, and which, by the way, never worked out very well for me. But let's project ourselves 5 years in the future. Say we all met here 5 years from now. What would we be talking about? What would be what do you see as the next big thing in this realm?
I'll take this real quick, because
Great.
this is available. This is available now, but it's becoming more available. Hackers are getting less sophisticated. The tools that they're using are more sophisticated. There's a concept called crimeware as a service. And so I, for $24.99 a month, can contact a company in Eastern Europe. I can get ransomware as a service. They will provide me all of the tools that I need to launch a ransomware attack. All I simply need to do is upload the email addresses that I want to launch the attack on. If the attack is not successful, they provide me with technical support. I can call an 800 number, and I can say, I tried to launch a ransomware attack on ABC. It wasn't successful. Do you have any suggestions for me as to how I word the phishing email better? Oh, your grammar wasn't right here. You should try that again. I think that crimeware as a service and that sort of stuff is just going to continue to increase, which in turn is going to give your 14-year-old kid who might not have been raised properly, and I hope all of yours have, the ability to go on the dark web and purchase something for a very inexpensive price and do a whole heck of a lot of damage. I think that it's big now, it's growing, and I think that's where the wave of attacks are going to come from.
You know, I think that's all the time we have for this panel, and I regret I never got to ask my question of why all those phishing emails have such bad grammar. It must be a requirement. But anyway, let's again thank our track sponsor, the Los Angeles Police Protective League, and let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. Also, thanks to NINJIO for being a panelist. Please be sure once again to fill out your exit survey and give them to Elizabeth Hawley here, or any VICA staff member or ambassador in the room. Or you can turn it in at the registration table in the foyer or the foyer. The next panel begins at 11 a.m., so in the meantime, please be sure to visit our exhibitors and make sure you return your bingo card to the VICA registration table. You can win a number of prizes, including round-trip tickets on Southwest Airlines, or a signed football from the LA Rams, or tickets to Magic Mountain. So please do that. Thanks again for your attendance, and see you soon.
There's simply not enough